Sometimes the most powerful stories begin not with a shout, but with a whisper. When an elderly black woman walked quietly into a fine dining restaurant in Portland, no one could have predicted the storm her presence would stir. She didn't demand attention. She didn't raise her voice. But what unfolded in that room became a moment of reckoning about respect, dignity, and the quiet strength so often overlooked in older generations. For anyone who's ever felt unseen or dismissed because of age or appearance, this story speaks to the heart. Because sometimes the most graceful among us are the ones who teach the hardest lessons. It was the kind of afternoon that held a certain golden stillness, when time slows down just enough to notice life's finer details. The sun filtered gently through the tall windows of a renowned Portland restaurant, casting a warm glow across white tablecloths, flickering candles, and the soft movement of servers gliding between tables. Patrons chatted in hushed tones, celebrating milestones, closing business deals, or simply savoring the day. It was a place designed for elegance, a sanctuary for those who belonged. Then she walked in. An elderly black woman, dignified in a navy blue coat with embroidered cuffs, stepped inside with grace honed over decades. Her movements were steady, her posture upright, her face calm yet composed with quiet authority. She didn't command the room, but the room noticed her nonetheless. Some turned their heads, others glanced briefly before returning to their wine glasses and conversations. The hostess offered a smile that felt slightly too practiced, slightly too hollow, as if unsure how to respond to a presence that didn't quite match the usual clientele. She gave her name, Mrs. Holloway, and was led to a small table near the kitchen, tucked away, unassuming, almost out of sight. No complaint passed her lips. She simply folded her hands, glanced at the menu, and waited. But this wasn't just a dinner reservation. This was the beginning of something much larger. Because sometimes when an older woman enters a room with grace instead of noise, she brings with her not just years, but wisdom, stories, and strength. And if the world chooses not to see her, it is the world that is missing something sacred. This was the moment and the room began to shift, though no one yet realized it. At first, the signs were barely noticeable. Small gestures that might seem harmless to the untrained eye. A missed greeting, a delay that stretched longer than it should. The waiter's hurried steps passed her table again and again, without so much as a glance of acknowledgement. But Mrs. Holloway, seated quietly near the kitchen, noticed everything, and so did a few others. This wasn't the loud kind of disrespect. It didn't come with raised voices or cruel words. No, this was the kind that hides behind smiles, shrugs, and "we're very busy right now." The kind that older women, especially those who have weathered storms with dignity, have learned to recognize in a heartbeat. Despite the neglect, she didn't fidget or complain. She didn't look around helplessly or demand attention. Instead, she simply sat there, back straight, hands resting gently on the table, embodying the quiet strength of someone who's seen much, endured more, and chosen grace anyway. But even grace has its limits. Other diners, sensing the tension, began to whisper. Eyes flicked toward her table, confused and uneasy. How could it be that this woman, elegant, composed, entirely present, was the only one left untouched, unserved, unnoticed? For those who've lived long enough, the experience was all too familiar. Being spoken over, being looked past, being seated at the metaphorical and sometimes literal corner of the room. It's not about the water glass left empty, it's about what it means. Mrs. Holloway didn't need a scene to prove her worth. Her very presence was a quiet protest, her silence a mirror reflecting something uncomfortable back to the room. And while she waited, the real story was already unfolding, not just in service denied, but in character revealed. Because dignity doesn't need an audience, but sometimes an audience needs to witness dignity. Across the room, seated near the bar, a man watched in silence. His tailored navy blazer hinted at refinement, but it was his eyes, sharp, steady, unblinking, that told the real story. Every delayed glance, every dismissive gesture from the waiter, every moment of silent disregard toward the elderly woman near the kitchen, he saw it all. And with each passing second, his stillness grew heavier, more deliberate. This man wasn't just a concerned diner. He was the owner of the restaurant. And the woman being overlooked, spoken down to, and nearly erased by subtle acts of indifference, she was his mother. Elijah Holloway had built this restaurant with his bare hands and a heart full of purpose. Every chair, every menu detail, every polished surface was a tribute to the values she'd instilled in him. Kindness, integrity, and strength that didn't need to announce itself. Watching her now, treated like an afterthought in the very place he created, ignited something quiet but fierce inside him. But he didn't rise in anger. Not yet. Like his mother, Elijah understood the power of silence, the weight of observation. He wanted to see who Todd, the waiter, would reveal himself to be when he thought no one of importance was watching. And so Elijah sat, his fingers tapping lightly on the table, his jaw tight, his thoughts racing. For older adults who've watched their children grow into protectors, leaders, and truth-tellers, this moment resonates deeply. Elijah wasn't just defending his mother, he was honoring every lesson she had ever taught him. Sometimes love doesn't shout. Sometimes it waits, quiet and unwavering, until the moment justice must be served. And in that moment, Elijah wasn't just a son, he was a witness. And soon he would become the reckoning. She could have spoken up. She had every right to raise her voice, to call attention to the waiter's cold tone, to the way her glass sat empty while laughter and service flowed freely all around her. But Mrs. Holloway did none of that. Instead, she sat with the stillness of someone who had lived long enough to know that time reveals all truths, and character is often best exposed in silence. Her hands rested gently on the table. Her posture never faltered. Not once did she let frustration shape her face. She was the embodiment of grace, of poise shaped over decades of life's lessons. Some beautiful, some brutal, all survived. The weight of those experiences didn't make her bitter. They made her wise. There is something profoundly moving about an older woman who chooses dignity over disruption, especially in a world that too often fails to see her. She didn't seek pity. She didn't seek to prove herself. She simply waited, allowing others to show who they were, knowing that in doing so, she revealed her own strength. To the onlookers, her silence may have seemed passive, but to those who understand, it was a quiet power, a calm refusal to be rattled, a silent protest cloaked in elegance. Many older Americans will see themselves in her, a lifetime of being told to wait, to be patient, to not stir the waters, and yet they'll also feel the pride of knowing they have survived with their heads held high, that their worth has never depended on being seen, but on being true to who they are. Mrs. Holloway's dignity didn't demand the room's attention. It earned it, and in doing so, she reminded everyone watching that grace, real grace, is not weakness. It is strength refined by time. It happened without warning, but not without purpose. One moment, the waiter was cracking jokes at a nearby table, completely unaware that the very foundation of the restaurant was about to shift beneath his feet. The next, Elijah Holloway stood, calm, composed, yet carrying the unmistakable weight of a man who had seen enough. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't storm across the room. He simply walked, measured steps that seemed to silence the very air itself. Conversations faded. The pianist's fingers hovered over the keys. Something was coming, something righteous. "Excuse me," he said, his voice low but unmistakably clear. "I've been here the whole time, watching." The waiter's smirk fell away like autumn leaves in the wind. Elijah's words didn't need drama. They carried truth. Heavy, undeniable truth. "That woman you've ignored for 30 minutes? That's my mother." In that single sentence, everything changed. Older Americans watching this moment would understand its gravity, because they know what it means to be overlooked. And more importantly, they know the power of being seen. The son who once sat at his mother's table now stood as her defender. And in doing so, he stood for every elder who has ever been treated as invisible. But what made the moment unforgettable wasn't the confrontation, it was the control. Elijah didn't lash out. He delivered justice with a grace that mirrored his mother's. His strength was in restraint, in allowing the truth to speak louder than anger. And as the waiter stood frozen, exposed before a now silent room, it wasn't just about poor service anymore. It was about what we tolerate, about what we let slide, and about what happens when someone finally says, "No more." In that moment, Elijah didn't just protect his mother's dignity, he honored it, and he reminded everyone in the room, some lines are never meant to be crossed. There are moments that split time, before and after. Elijah's voice, calm yet thunderous in meaning, cut through the room like a bell tolling truth. That's my mother. The words didn't need elaboration. They were complete. They were sacred. Gasps rippled quietly through the restaurant like a wave of awakening. Heads turned, conversations froze mid-sentence, and the weight of realization settled over every table. The woman in the embroidered navy coat, the one who had been ignored, minimized, and quietly dismissed, was no stranger at all. She was the mother of the man who built this very place, the matriarch behind the vision, the reason it all existed. For older adults watching this unfold, it strikes a familiar chord, the deep yearning to be recognized, not for titles or achievements, but for presence, for who you are and what you've lived through. There is something profoundly moving about a child, now grown, rising to defend the parent who once carried their world on her back. Elijah's revelation wasn't just personal, it was purposeful. In lifting the veil, he forced the room to see not only the woman in front of them, but themselves, their assumptions, their silence, their complicity. The shame that flushed the waiter's face wasn't just because he had disrespected the owner's mother. It was because he had been caught treating someone as if she didn't matter. And now the truth was undeniable. Mrs. Holloway didn't gloat. She didn't need to. Her son's words had done what her silence could not. They reset the balance of respect in that room. In that single sentence, Elijah didn't just reveal identity, he restored dignity. And for every older person who has ever been overlooked, this moment said, "You are seen, you are worthy, and you will be defended." The silence that followed Elijah's words was unlike any before. It wasn't awkward, it was awakening. The kind of stillness that settles after truth has been spoken aloud, with no room left for excuses. The waiter stood motionless, the color drained from his face, the room now a mirror reflecting his behavior back at him. It wasn't just that he had disrespected the owner's mother, it was that he had revealed a deeper flaw. How easily we can forget to see the humanity in others. Without raising his voice, Elijah delivered a sentence more cutting than anger ever could. "You're done for the day." And just like that, the apron was untied. The door swung closed. The lesson began. But it didn't end with one man's dismissal. It echoed throughout the restaurant like a quiet sermon. The manager stepped in with humility, personally apologizing to Mrs. Holloway as she filled her water glass. Something so small, now imbued with significance. The staff, once distracted, moved with new attentiveness. Diners whispered, not with gossip, but reflection. For older viewers, this moment speaks volumes. It's not about revenge, it's about restoration. About what it means to hold dignity, not with noise, but with action. It's about raising a child who understands that true leadership is not found in status, but in character. Mrs. Holloway didn't need justice served with fury. Her son offered it with grace, and in doing so reminded everyone watching, real change doesn't always come with applause. It often comes with uncomfortable truth and the courage to correct it. And for every elder who's been made to feel invisible, this moment was a gentle but firm declaration. You are not forgotten, and your worth is not negotiable. Long after the waiter had left and the noise of the restaurant cautiously returned, something had shifted. Not just in the air, but in the hearts of those who remained. Elijah didn't just restore order that evening, he reset the standard. In the quiet moments that followed, as meals were served and wine glasses refilled, there was an unspoken understanding that lingered between the tables. Respect is not optional. At the end of the night, Dana, the restaurant's manager, gathered the staff. Her voice was calm but resolute. Tonight wasn't just about service, she said. It was about what kind of culture we allow to grow here. Heads nodded, eyes downcast, minds reflective. This was more than a policy correction. It was a moral recalibration. Older adults know this kind of leadership. It's the kind that doesn't just correct mistakes. It shapes people. Elijah hadn't lashed out. He had taught. And in doing so, he left behind a lesson no one would soon forget. Every guest deserves to be treated with dignity, no matter their age, appearance, or background. Mrs. Holloway, having endured the evening with grace and silence, didn't ask for apologies. But she received them, not just in words, but in actions. A thoughtfully served meal, a gentle tone, a room that now saw her clearly. This moment was not about punishing the guilty. It was about awakening the indifferent. For those in their later years, it was a moment of affirmation that even in a world that moves fast and often forgets its elders, there are still places and people willing to pause, reflect, and do better. Because true hospitality doesn't come from menus or tablecloths. It comes from the heart. And in that restaurant, on that night, hearts were quietly, irrevocably changed. Leadership doesn't always look like giving speeches or sitting at the head of the table. Sometimes it looks like standing quietly for what's right, especially when no one expects you to. For Elijah Holloway, that moment came not with planning or grandeur, but with the sight of his mother seated alone, treated as though she didn't belong in a place she had inspired him to build. What he did next didn't just reveal his strength as a son, it revealed his strength as a man. He didn't make a scene. He made a statement, not just to the waiter, but to every person in the room. That dignity was not conditional. That respect wasn't a luxury reserved for the young or well-dressed. And that his restaurant, his life's work, would never be a place where silence was allowed to excuse injustice. Older generations understand the weight of such moments. They've seen leaders rise and fall, not by their words, but by their choices. Elijah's actions were not fueled by pride, but by purpose. He had been raised by a woman who taught him to lead with grace, to listen before reacting, and to never let someone's worth be questioned simply because others failed to recognize it. That night, he upheld those lessons, not with fanfare, but with quiet conviction. For every elder who has spent a lifetime guiding others, this moment was more than satisfying. It was sacred, because it showed that the values they've lived by still matter, still echo, still shape the next generation. And in a world too quick to overlook, Elijah reminded us all, true leadership shows itself not when it's easy, but when it's necessary. And when it does, it leaves a legacy no title ever could. As the night wore on and the restaurant slowly returned to its familiar rhythm, something intangible remained in the air, like the scent of a memory you can't quite place, but can't ignore either. Dishes were cleared, music resumed, and laughter tiptoed back into the room. But those who had witnessed what unfolded that evening would never quite see the place, or themselves, the same way again. Because this wasn't just a dinner service interrupted, it was a quiet revelation. They had come for fine food and elegant ambiance, but they left with something far more nourishing, a glimpse of dignity standing its ground, of injustice being calmly but firmly called out, and of a mother and son whose silent bond spoke louder than any confrontation ever could. Mrs. Holloway never asked for attention. She didn't raise her voice, didn't demand compensation, didn't leave in protest. And yet, by simply holding her head high and letting others reveal their true character, she taught a lesson no lecture could deliver. Elijah, in turn, taught one of his own about what it means to lead with integrity and to protect not just a reputation, but a legacy. For older Americans who have often been made to feel invisible, this night offered something rare and beautiful. Validation. It whispered, "You still matter. You are still seen." And for the younger ones in the room, it offered a different kind of education, one that won't fade with time. As Mrs. Holloway stepped out into the night air, her presence lingered like a hymn, a quiet benediction reminding everyone that kindness is not optional and respect is not earned by age, but owed by decency. And long after the tables were cleared, the story of that evening remained. Etched not just into memory, but into the moral fabric of every person present. Because sometimes the deepest change begins with simply being witnessed. In a world that so often rushes past the quiet, the seasoned, the wise, this story is a reminder that dignity never fades with age. It only deepens. Mrs. Holloway didn't raise her voice to be heard. She let her presence do the speaking. And Elijah, her son, answered not with fury, but with grace born of her teachings. For every older soul who has ever been overlooked, this moment is a promise. You are not invisible. Your worth is immeasurable. And when the world forgets, let your strength and the love you've poured into others speak for you, always.